I think most horror movies these days just aren't scary anymore. Especially the higher budget ones from the big studios, like the newer Halloween and Scream sequels, Send Help, Weapons, Hard Eyes, just to name a few. Most of them aren't bad, don't get me wrong. In fact, I actually enjoy most of them. But they feel more like action thrillers with a lot of blood and jump scares rather than real horror. They basically just throw in a lot of gore, some creative kills, cheap jump scares, loud music stings, and call it a day. It's rare to get something that's genuinely terrifying. The last two horror movies that actually scared me were The Conjuring, which released back in 2013, and Skinamarink, which released in 2022. Those films were very effective at making your brain do the work instead of just showing you everything. But now it's starting to feel like horror is losing its fear factor. So, when I saw the trailer for this new horror movie Undertone, it immediately caught my attention because the trailer made it look like it was going to be a very scary movie. And to make it even better, the trailer showed that the movie was built around audio and called itself the scariest movie you'll ever hear. And that really got me intrigued because audio horror done right can be terrifying. You don't need to see any monsters, you just need eerie sounds that mess with your head. The type of stuff that makes you paranoid about what's in the dark, or what's not there at all. I had pretty high expectations going in, but I also knew to not keep them too high because with these smaller films with cool premises, they're always hit or miss, depending on their execution. But I was hopeful that this one would end up being good. And after watching it, yeah, it did end up living up to my expectations. But it didn't really surpass them. But the best part was that it was genuinely scary. In fact, I'd even say it's one of the scariest films I've seen in years. The film is about this girl, Evie, who's a skeptical co-host of a paranormal podcast called Undertone. And she recently had to move back into her childhood home to take care of her dying mom. And the whole movie takes place in this one house. She then gets these 10 mysterious audio files from an anonymous email, and she starts breaking them down. But as she listens, weird things start happening around her. What makes it work so well for me is how it builds tension without relying on the cheap jump scares. There is, maybe one or two of them in the movie, but most of the fear comes from the anticipation. The framing of each scene was done so well. Evie's rarely centered in the shot. She's almost always off to the side, and the majority of the frame is just empty, dark space, like hallways and doorways. And every time that happens, you're bracing yourself and waiting for something to appear. It got to the point to where I was having trouble paying attention to the actual movie because I was analyzing everything going on in the background and trying to see if something was going to move. And since this is a horror movie about audio, it's got to have really good sound design, which this movie does have. And when they use it, it's very effective. But honestly, I wanted more from it. Everything was hyping this up as the scariest movie you'll ever hear. And while they definitely deliver on that, a lot of the dread still comes from the visuals. Like the framing in those dark hallways I mentioned earlier, or like shadows moving behind someone. It even had some uncanny imagery sprinkled throughout the movie. I was just expecting more reliance on pure sound, like to the point where you're questioning every noise in your own room. They could have pushed it further, but what they did do worked really well. Another thing that didn't really bother me, but it might bother others, was that the movie takes its time. Most of the film isn't like edge-of-your-seat scary. It's more of a slow burn that focuses on building unease with the whole podcast setup. And there's really only two characters in this movie, Evie and her mom. There's technically more, but you never actually see them. You just hear them on the phone, or they are just off frame. There's even a scene in the film when a doctor comes to visit, but they never show her at all. Like, they just added in the lines during post-production, and it did confuse me for a little bit. So if you're not into that minimalist style with one location, basically one character with a slow-burning plot, you might end up getting bored. But that slow pace definitely pays off in the last 15 to 20 minutes, because those final scenes make this movie go from having some pretty decent scares here and there to legitimately horrifying. And all with no gore, no big monsters, not even any violence, really. It's just pure psychological horror that gets under your skin. I'm not even kidding. There was a certain point near the end where I actually covered my eyes and I wanted to just look away from the screen, which I've never done before. Your mind really does all the heavy lifting here by filling itself with horrors worse than anything they could have shown on screen. And that's what made The Conjuring and Skinamarink so effective for me, and Undertone absolutely nails that here. And part of the reason why it hit so hard for me was the topic they chose to tackle for this film. I'm not going to say what it is to avoid spoilers, but it is a topic that I am very sensitive to, and it can really affect me emotionally, and the way they used it elevated the whole thing for me. And this is where they really took advantage of the audio horror, especially with one specific part involving hitting a bag against the wall. You'll know what I'm talking about when you see the movie, but that plays through those last 20 minutes, and I thought it was very haunting. It's definitely not going to be for everyone, though. If you are wanting that fast pacing or big set pieces, you might end up walking out disappointed. But overall, while Undertone has some genuinely terrifying moments, and does a good job at executing its simple but interesting premise, that's pretty much all it does. What you see in the trailer is exactly what you get. It delivers on its promises, but doesn't really do anything more than that. So I give it an 8 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.